Welcome to the Stretch to Go podcast. My name is Ian Ray, your host. Today I have Tom Sullivent, founder and creator of Sullivent Shoes. It's the world's finest barefoot dress shoes on the market. I'm based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tom, welcome to the Stretch to Go podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you for hopping on. And first of all, Tom, I know most people who might not know, you're an attorney by trade, correct?
Right.
How did being an attorney and barefoot shoes, when did those two worlds collide?
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting story. I've been an attorney now 29 years. I actually started this about 11 years ago, and I got into kind of barefoot minimalist shoes because I had a bunion on the left side, and I found it a lot more comfortable to have the zero drop or real close to zero drop, and then the foot shape, toe bed. And so I got into all that, and then I could not find anything to wear with a suit. And I tried everything that was out there. And it just, when you got it on and you actually put the suit on and you looked at it, it just didn't look quite right. So
Hmm.
I thought I thought I'd make it. So that's how it originated.
Gotcha. And of course, the name Sullivent Shoes, named after your last name, correct?
Right.
Yeah,
And
okay.
actually I had met with a lady that's real creative, friend of mine, and we were going to meet for coffee and talk about the name. And I went through a bunch of names and things, and she said, "Well, your name's kind of unique, and a lot of these shoe brands, they're just people's names." And so I thought, wow, that was easy. I could have done that. But yeah. So the Tomas is actually, that's a little bit of a play on my name. My name's Thomas, Thomas, but we call it Tomas Sullivent. So yeah.
Love it. Okay. And then of course there's it's a peacock, correct? It's a logo.
Right. Right.
Care to explain to us why you chose a peacock? I'm always curious about logos and design. So,
Right. Well, the when I first started getting shoes, the minimalist barefoot shoes, there was zero, which I met Steven Soshin a couple times in Boulder on a way to a ski trip. I asked if I could stop in and meet with him, showed him some of my prototypes, and then Limbs, Vivo Barefoot,
hmm.
Ultra. But a lot of these brands, when you looked at them, they were very, I use the word utilitarian, kind of explaining the benefits of a wide toe box, explaining the benefits of zero drop, x-ray, showing x-rays and different things. And so I felt like that had already been covered. And
Yeah.
I really, our brand to be part of this community, but I wanted it to show off. I wanted it to be a show off. So to me, the peacock was a nice logo to say that's why we're here. We're to be, the Gucci of this community, if
Yeah.
we can.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, there are a lot of brands, like I said, who do a lot of educational aspects of the barefoot shoes. So I agree. But there aren't many who are, let's say, who have a quality is their main bread, of their shoes. So that's awesome.
Right, right.
So you had bunions wearing these dress shoes. I mean, kind of tell what explain to us. Like dress shoes are notorious for their pointed shoe, especially the toe box. And how are you able to create such, I wouldn't say too wide of a toe box, but like the perfect shape for a foot shape for dress shoes? How were you able to do that? Because you said you had several prototypes and whatnot. So what's the process like?
Yeah, so basically, I found a custom shoemaker on the East Coast. We were working on some prototypes. I flew out there, met with another company, third party, that computer designs the shapes. And what kept being produced were shoes that were just too narrow. And I kept kind of insisting what I wanted the shape to look like. And when we finally came to an agreement as to what I was wanting and that it had to be that, they basically said, not interested in doing this. So I found another guy who was on the West Coast and flew out there and worked with him. And he created the first real prototype. I call it Atom. It was the first real prototype that worked. It was slightly wider than the existing model, and the toe box was bigger inside. And my foot has been described by the shoemakers as pretty much average length to width and volume. So it actually worked pretty good as a model for kind of the sizing, internal sizing of it. So it has more than an average person's width inside, and we try not to reduce the toe box too much, but we are still making slight tweaks to it as we go along. They're just different. Yeah, there was a lot, everything from because the components really of the minimalist barefoot genre is, I think, in order of priority, wide toe box or foot
Mhm.
shaped toe box,
Yeah.
zero drop close to it, flexible, and then reduced toe spring. If you have toe spring, especially in a more rigid shoe or a traditional shoe like ours, it can create some flexion in the toes. So we want that to be low, but you also have to be able to walk in it smoothly. So it's been a combination of all of these factors trying to make the thing we think is the most comfortable and look really classy.
Yeah. I'm sure you spent years and money investing and going through so many pairs of shoes of your own, so that you could
Right.
finally. Because I mean, like this is just one of your shoe collections that you have. I think this is the Adrian that I have, but I think you have the mothership, the mother, the first original Sullivent shoes that you probably came out with. That's your bread and butter that most people purchase, and I'm just curious to see like do you always get feedback from customers or like people who are testing it out prior to, or is it mostly just from you know, um, your experience of wearing shoes that you're saying, hey, let's just stick with these models and collections?
Well, originally it was me. And then now we have over the last 15 months since we really launched, we've had good feedback and we've had people order multiple, 4 pairs of shoes and we talk to them about, what they like. And of course, anytime you make a shoe, it can't fit everyone. And so some people's feet have too much volume. It's very thick foot. We go up to size 48. We've had some people that said it was too small. So we have a new order coming in here in the next few weeks, and it goes up to size 50. So, and that's European sizes. So that's probably somewhere around a 17, and that should accommodate. But we really want to be. I want to have something. If somebody needs it, if it was bigger than a 50, I would take it to bigger than a 50. We just want. We're kind of. I just say we're kind of part of the community. We're going to create something that doesn't exist. If somebody's already creating it, there's no reason for us to even do it. We're just going to be creating things that don't exist. And if there's people and they tell us things they want removable insoles. They think they want a model that has more volume. They want what was one of them just yesterday. They wanted a toe cap, maybe with some broking, which we'd already designed some of those, and I can talk about that later. But so yeah, we get lots of feedback. Actually, the guys are very talkative.
That's great. Typical demographic of people who are wearing these. Who are they? Your avatar profile of people who are looking for barefoot dress shoes. Who are they that you guys have found through research or data?
They are professionals. So we can see who a lot of these people are, and they're just everything from business people to lawyers to doctors to business owners. So and then I would say the bulk of them are barefooters, or at least into minimalist shoes. Because a lot of them own Vivo Barefoot because that's a brand that tends to our sizing seems to match up with Vivo. So I asked them if you have a pair of those, whatever size that is, ours will probably fit it. So we know that, a lot of them are barefooters. So I would just say, probably 25 to 44 is our biggest demographic, professionals, men. So, but we can see, we do have a lot of women that are asking us, your website says, women's shoes coming soon, when is soon? So we know that they're interested in a more dressy women's shoe as well, and so we have some of those in the works too.
Okay, of course. That's pretty soon, like 6 months, a year. How soon is that?
I would say less than 6 months. We have our first wearable prototype coming in next week, and
Nice.
it'll be a double top strap, and then we also have a loafer, and we will have a back strap. So we'll have those 3 models that are being tested by women, and if it's good, then I think we would have those before Anya's show in May, which we will be at. So it would be my goal to have those available in Chicago.
Crazy. Okay, that's awesome. Well, exciting times for you in the brand then.
Yeah,
Launching it. Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
All right. So let's go over the aspects of what makes your Sullivent shoes so unique from the marketplace. So if you want to grab some of your shoes, so we can kind of talk about like the aspects of the shoe, because you said these are made overseas, and we know that typically in Europe there have great hand craftsmanships of shoe cobblers who make these. So let's kind of talk about what are your favorite aspects of your shoes that makes it so unique on the market.
Well, the favorite aspect, I would say, probably the thing that makes it very different is that we do not cut in on the big toe. You'll see a lot of brands will say, wide shoes or whatever. But when you get down to it, they all cut in. So they're all going to push the big toe inward. And so that was kind of the beef early on was with the regular shoe people. They were just like, one, they thought it looked weird. And I think honestly, they didn't want to be a part of that design. And I think they didn't have confidence in the sales. And partly I wasn't that concerned about the sales. And I would tell them that. My thing is I wanted to create something that I felt logically should exist. And I used to say if 50 people want it, then, at least 50 people got something they needed. Well, it's a lot bigger than that now, and that it's a lot more people are, coming to the realization that having something that just is shaped like the foot makes sense, and they feel so good that once they wear it, the rest of their shoes, they really can't even wear them as far as their dress shoes. And I tell people once I finally had prototypes of my own that I could wear every day, I just donated the rest of them, just they were gone. So, because even while I was making this shoe, I could wear zeros and ultras and all day long, or on weekends, evenings. But when I was at work, if I was going to court or something like that, I had to wear the traditional shoes because I had to look the part. In my mind, I did. And so when I created this, there's no cap toe, there's no broguing. And part of that is because when we did it, it made it more noticeable. And this was the original shoe, the Mutiny.
Mm-hmm.
And we basically made it so that it was as least noticeable as possible. When you look from the side, you notice it less. When you are standing there looking straight down at it, that's where it looks the widest. And so I was just trying to create something that you could be in a meeting, you put your foot up, they see a leather sole, they see a heel, the heel's small, but it still has all the appearances of a dress shoe, a regular dress shoe.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So to me, the biggest aspect is this part. This is where most shoes cut in, or they'll add a piece to the end, which to me makes it cumbersome to walk in. And so for me, we just followed the ergonomic shape of the foot.
Yeah. I've heard of I've seen and wear shoes who say they're anatomical foot shaped, which to me it's not really comfortable. I don't feel a lot of anatomical shape. I mean, because I think they cut in, they push it, and I usually take out the insole and put my foot on top of it to see where my foot and my toes are, and typically it is over that insole. So if it's a true, I'd say wide toe box shoe, when I put down the insole, and I can comfortably, without even having to spread my toes, if it's within the insole, I know that's a great foot shaped shoe itself. Because like I said, there are
Right.
there are brands, quote unquote, who would say they're wide toe box or anatomical foot shape, but I think the hidden thing that you don't really see is like I said, the insole is when you're putting it on. That toe, the small toe, and then of course the big toe does get squished because typically you see it from the outside, but the inside is where you feel that the toes are doing its thing of being conformed.
Right. Yeah. And before I started this shoe, I went to a foot doctor years ago and had these custom orthotics made. And I remember thinking, this was even before I got into any of the Barefoot Minimalist shoes. I thought, how is this really going to fix it? Because it's just, I could tell it was just smashing my feet. How was this custom orthotic that went into my men's dress shoe going to do anything? And so, yeah. And then and basically once I had a pair of Ultras and the Zeros, which, he was on Shark Tank, Steven Sashin years ago. And those little sandals, they're really small, but they are very comfortable. And once I started wearing stuff like that and got kind of researching and all that, I realized the benefit of not squeezing your toes. And I think a lot of these brands out there that are not really in our community, they say all kinds of things that really just aren't true. They'll say foot shaped and it's almost foot shaped. It needs to be foot shaped. And also, I think that the wide toe box, the phrase wide toe box has been a little bit confusing. We have to use it on our website, in our SEO, because people are typing in wide toe box men's dress shoe. But it makes a lot of people outside of this niche confused because they'll say, my husband has wide feet, so I think I need this shoe, And so I think that they're thinking this is a shoe for, people with wide feet, when it's really just a shoe for, an average foot too. So I think that if the word foot shape would be better than wide toe box, or foot shaped toe box, probably a better phrase, less confusing to, people that aren't really into these shoes yet.
Even like the term wide, I guess if you're looking at conventional shoes, even wide is not the wide. It's just the width of the foot, but not the toe splay area, I should say. So
Right, right.
that's another thing.
They can
Yeah.
still be pointy and wide. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's right.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that's a good conversation to have. And I think, like I said, for most people who have wider foot, and like I said, I don't have wide foot. I have an average foot. There are brands out there for sure who have a very wide footbed, and even the shoe itself. So there are brands. They just have to do the research. But one thing for I'm curious is that when you went to go, I guess, abroad and probably look at these shoes to get produced and whatnot, how did you come across factories or shoe cobblers who were actually doing these? Like, what did you have to do to find the right person, right people to make your shoes?
Yeah, some of it was just probably a little bit of luck. The shoe, the original prototype makers, the first one on the East Coast was a custom shoemaker, and he'd been in several news articles. I got a hold of him and talked to him about what I wanted to do. That's the one that was disinterested once, kind of realized the mainly the big turnoff was the toe box. That was the turnoff. It wasn't the zero drop, but the West Coast person was just a person that was like, hey, whatever you want. You tell me what you want. And so that allowed us to create Atom. And there was another company involved in assisting in the last design and making. So once we had that, then the question is factories. And that was a real problem. I tried factories in Italy, didn't quite work out. COVID hit. I had the factory in Spain in Portugal, and just had a really crazy story about that I won't go into all the details, but a lady I knew was going to be over in Lisbon, and I said, see if you can find my shoes because they're over at this factory and now they've gone dark on me. And she went over to the factory and actually retrieved the prototype and brought it back to me. And then I was communicating, emailing all these different companies. Is anybody interested in? And one guy reached out to me and said, I wouldn't mind talking about it. And he was in Spain. And so we started that communication. So he still today is the one that's at the factory that does it. But we have some other models. And even today, we have one model. I won't say what it is yet, and maybe we'll revisit here in 6 months or something, but it makes a different kind of shoe, a different kind of boot. And we reached out to 6 factories and 5 said no. So they're still, when they make this shoe, they have to use a different piece on their machine. And then they describe the creation of the shoe as kind of, can't remember the phrase they use, but it's not standard. So they have to take a little more time and explain to everybody that's working on it, what's going on with it. So kind of technical is what I think so I think some factories, and I don't know why they would say no. It could be It could be they're just, at max capacity or who knows what. But for whatever reason, they look at that and say, we really don't want to try to tackle that. So, but when they will work with you, then that's wonderful. And we've come a long way in 15 months. And I think getting out of the gate, we accomplished a lot, but now we have a great relationship with the factory. And so we are now implementing things we wanted to implement early on, but doing everything at once was, too much. Just, we'd have interpreters and we're talking and trying to make it happen. But I think what we created was a really great product. They're great products. But we're still working and fine tuning and we're designing new models. So I think we'll have some fun stuff coming out.
Cool. So 15 months ago, Sullivent Shoes was created. Your first, the Mutiny came out. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Um, where have you seen from the time that you've gone into minimalist barefoot shoes? Where have you seen the industry grow from the time that you started 11 years ago? Has it grown exponentially?
Yeah. Well, I think the industry in general has grown, but one thing that I have noticed is I met Lee, who is with Gaucho Ninja out of UK.
Yeah.
He has a shoe that he's done that is for kind of construction areas. It's a reinforced toe. He had at least two different models. One of them was kind of a carbon fiber, and the other one may have been steel. But he was telling me some other ones, and I won't mention what those are now in case he's kind of keeping that under wraps. But these shoes would, whenever like our shoe, I know what the elements are of the Barefoot Minimalist shoe. We talked about that, but I'm trying to implement those into the shoe as good as I can. And, we're working with factories that are traditional high end fashion shoe factories. Most of the market currently is outdoor athletic shoes, some casual dress, but they're built on platforms where the factories can, they do rubber injection molded, maybe where ours do not do that. Ours only do, Blake stitching or welting. And so different factories, can produce different things. But for us, these factories, we're working within this very traditional type of shoe and factory. So implementing everything we want into the shoe is not there yet, but it's really close. But I say all that to say, I think this barefoot market is probably getting ready to see a real explosion of brands that don't necessarily meet all those elements, but they still have an intended purpose. So, like construction, where you might need a certain type of sole, reinforced sole, or a toe box. It doesn't have the flexibility somebody wants, but it may be required for a person to have, be on the floor having that type of shoe. Ours, if you're in court, it doesn't have the flexibility of the rubber injection molded. It's traditional, but it looks the part, and the Texarado boots. Have you
Yeah.
seen those?
Oh, yeah. He looks clean in Colorado. He's
Yeah.
out of Bailey, Colorado. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they look really tough, and I don't know, they look heavy, but there's a place for that. And so I think you're going to see, and I have had some people call me that they have their own brands that aren't out there yet, and they've asked me some questions, and we've talked about some things, and they have very specific things they're creating that don't exist yet. And I think you're going to see barefooters that are out there in the world doing all kinds of things, firemen, people that need just different kinds of shoes that mainly they're looking for foot shape, but they're also looking for as close to zero drop as possible. If
Mhm.
you can get flexibility, get it, all of that in these different. So I think this whole area is going to really grow. It's already growing, since I started.
No, I've
All the
I've noticed too. I've only been in barefoot shoes for 2 years, but of course they had with Steven Sashin with the first barefoot basketball shoe. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
revolutionary thing, right?
right,
Who thought
right.
barefoot and basketball? I mean, eventually it's going to be there's soccer cleats here, barefoot shoes, rock climbing. I mean, there's slowly. I think that people are searching and looking for alternatives. But there are, I guess, a time and purpose, I'd say, for an actual barefoot. I don't know. That's where I'm still learning myself. That's why I had this podcast, because I'm on this journey of learning how the foot functions and how when to use these tools properly. Because you don't want to, first of all, go cold turkey and just drop up the conventional shoes into barefoot shoes, because there's a process. And most people probably don't understand, like, the foot. If your foot is weak, then these tools or your shoes, it will help you, but it's not going to help you in the long term, because you have to really look at the foot of where it is, whether if it's flexibility, the strength, these small intrinsic muscles that you don't work on, then you don't get to be in these shoes. So it's a process. I mean, it took me 2 years to just get into barefoot shoes. So yeah, that's a
Yeah. We know the zero shoe, I
mhm,
noticed that when I wore the little sandal, if you just wore the little sandal, summertime, you can wear it all, maybe, on vacation 2 weeks or something, and you're walking a lot, you can really tell when you wake up that your ankles and your feet have worked because they didn't have cushion of shoes and things. If you take the sandal off and you go walking 3 to 5 miles, 3 or 4 times a week, walking on asphalt or concrete, the pads of your feet will thicken up.
mm,
So when you basically go down to no shoe, your whole foot, everything from muscles to the pads, everything starts kind of beefing up and strengthening up. And when you put it back in shoes, that decreases, in my opinion. And I'm
yeah,
not a doctor, but I will say one thing about the shoes, when I used to wear my old shoes, I would drive to the courthouse or somewhere. The shoes would be, sitting next to me. Put them on, get out of the car, go to whatever I was doing, get back in the car and take them off. Well, now I don't do that. These are so comfortable. I put them on, I wear them all day. So what I say is you actually can wear them too much because, foot strength and just, all the pads and everything, they benefit from no shoes. And these are, traditional shoes. So I do believe if you can be at the office and take the shoes off, be barefooted, and then when you're meeting people, you put it back on, that's still beneficial because our shoe is not as good as being barefooted, you know.
hmm, yeah.
And it's not as good as, it's not as good as for your foot, in my opinion, as any of these other brands, really. I mean, like Zero, Vivo Barefoot, Limbs, all of them, the Belinka, all the ones that are the new brands coming on, they're all like they're real flexible and everything. That is very beneficial for your foot. And I wear those. It's just we created ours for its intended purpose.
What are your goals for your brand in the next 5, 10 years? I mean, I know we were talking previously before this that you're coming out with a women's line of shoes, but what are some of your aspirations, goals? Obviously, you just started, but hey, I'm just curious. I mean, you have probably a lot in store because this is such a unique aspect of the market. So, what's your 5, 10 year goal?
Yeah, our goal first is to really explore the classic shoes, men's classic shoes. So, double monk buckle, maybe what they call split toe on the front, things that are out there in traditional shoes, we have to kind of analyze how that looks on our shoe. And so we have someone I'm working with now that is more of I have two different people now that one of them assists with kind of sourcing the things that we want, identifying specific things that we want, because right now we're inside the traditional shoe ecosystem. So they have their suppliers. They're not used to stepping outside those suppliers for maybe a more flexible sole. So, what is a more flexible sole that can still be stitched and resold? But the other person that we're working with is doing a lot more drawings now. So, we're really exploring drawings independent of the factory people we were working with and designing the shoes that way. We're actually kind of just doing it all on our own, creating it, the three-dimensional look, and then presenting it to the factory. So we're going to explore the classic shoes, whether the cap toes and broguing or a split toe front or kind of the ridges along the top, metal eyelets, whatever it may be, Oxfords. We're going to definitely explore that whole area, trying to just create the basics that have as many varieties that people might want, for their jobs and things like that. And then we're going to step outside a little bit of that classic look shoe maybe stretch it out just a little bit on a couple of ideas we're looking at. And then we may even, later, right now, that's our focus, but later I'd like to even get a little out there. We already have some things that we've done that look pretty crazy that I think would be a lot of fun, but I don't know. They would be more, I would say something like a fashion. It would be a fashion person would pick that as opposed to a barefooter. So
Uh,
our main focus is the barefoot, covering those bases. And I think the women's, we have 3 models, but that'll be a big focus is how do we create as many models as possible to give women as many options as possible. And then maybe even finding a designer who can take that shoe and build an outfit around them so that someone says, "Oh, if I have this very formal event to go to, I know I could wear that shoe that's crazy comfortable, looks nice, and that's how I could dress." With it. That's going to be something kind of once we have these models, we'll very quickly be trying to find someone to fashion consultant to kind of put together some outfits that go with these particular shoes.
yeah, that would be an awesome way for the fashion industry and what you have to offer. If those two worlds collide, I mean that would be amazing because people aren't into shoes. They would probably see these as a great way to help fix their issues with foot, especially people who are wearing those narrow toe box or high heels, whatever it is. I mean, there are many people who are in the fashion industry who wouldn't mind testing out barefoot shoes, hopefully, because there are, I would say, trends nowadays where there's barefoot style type of design shoes. Probably not
Right,
what we're
right.
talking, but the awareness is there. It's just you know, people. The more brands and the more people that are talking about like this with you and I, hopefully people will catch on and people will be interested and learn why they should get into minimalist barefoot shoes.
Well, I think the big turnoff of a wide toe box foot shaped shoe, of course, is just the idea that it doesn't really fit what our eyes tell us is the proper fashion. And so for me, I've noticed over the years now, my mind has really changed when I'll see a guy with really skinny shoes. To me, it doesn't look like it used to. Now I look at it as kind of, like that's crazy. I mean, how's this foot even hardly fitting in there? So, but other people will look at ours and say, that's nuts. I mean, why in the world is that so big? But then on our Instagram, I have a picture of my foot in the shoe, and you can see like my foot takes up almost every bit of the room in there. It's not this, it's just shaped like your foot. So I think the fashion element would be a nice element because if that got out there as a fashion side of it, it might help people rethink how they look at what's proper
Mhm.
because our shoes are logical. It makes sense to shape a shoe like your foot. It doesn't make sense for a shoe to be shaped like a canoe, but that's how we've kind of been, trained to think about it. So my hope is that as the years go on, everybody starts seeing the foot shape as a more normal looking thing. And I think everybody will be a lot more comfortable and a lot happier because of that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So here's our wanted to show you so this is our tuxedo shoe. And so I think you can see that's a peacock feather on there. And we're getting ready to do this in a lace up.
Ooh,
We've had several requests for lace up, but all these leathers, and I'll tell you, these are Italian leathers. Not to say we would never use another tannery, but
hmm
there are differences in tanneries, and I wouldn't have really thought there was, but I've gotten some things in, and I've realized I could close my eyes and open the box, and I can tell you if it's a good tannery because there's different smells to the materials. But this is actually Italian leather, patent leather. So this is not artificial. Everything we do will always be as much as possible higher and higher quality. That's my goal. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I've ran into clients who say they wear dress shoes for a living, and they harp on how long they've had one pair of shoes for like a decade, and that's how dress shoes should last, right? Is it should last long
right.
than just a few years because these are timepiece. They're meant to be worn with suits, dress pants, and highest of quality rather than your everyday running shoe. They're going to get beaten up these are probably, once in a while. But if you're in your profession, you're going to be wearing these every day. So you might as well look good and have the best quality so that it can last. And yeah.
Yeah, and that's an element too when they talk sustainability. That phrase gets, I think, overused sometimes. If you have a good quality, especially men's,
Hmm.
those styles stick around for a really long time. And if you make them to where they're resolable, they're good quality, if you take reasonable care of them, you should get 10 or more years out of them, you know? And so if you're using inferior products, maybe they're not natural skins and things, but they're less expensive, but they end up looking worse, and then you get rid of them, and so you have that debate anytime you're creating something. But one thing too is there's two primary ways you stitch a shoe. One is called Blake stitch or Blake construction, and the other is Goodyear welting. In ours, we chose Blake stitch because it ends up being a little bit thinner on the shoe, the sole, and they're both resolable. Both of those methods have been around a long time, over 150 years. And arguably, Blake construction is slightly more flexible than the Goodyear welting. So there's lots of little things that you have to kind of consider and, as I said, kind of create compromises inside this kind of traditional ecosystem. But now that we're in, and now that the factory, we were used to working with each other, and now we can kind of push the envelope a little bit. And I think we're going to see some things it may look very similar. A lot of people may not even notice any difference, but we're going to be doing some things to just try to get it more flexible if possible, as flat as possible, but still very comfortable and easy to walk in.
All right. Last question for you. What are some ways that you are planning to create more awareness and exposure for the brand and in general, in dress shoes in general? What are some ways that you guys have planned to create more awareness and exposure?
Well, we've had some stores that called us that are going to start carrying the shoes. And as a result, we started considering approaching some stores. But it's an interesting product because if you look at the regular traditional retailers, this is not something that fits their lineup. If you look at minimalist shoe stores, they are many times outdoor athletic brands. So it doesn't fit nicely in any store, but we did have two stores that have ordered inventory, and one of them is in Europe, one is in the US. And I haven't asked them if it's okay if I mention their names, so I won't mention them right now. But I think that in time, it will be the Barefoot shoes that start carrying shoes like ours. They'll also start understanding that there are unique circumstances for shoes that don't fit all the minimalist. You can't roll up every pair of shoes that might still have a lot of benefit,
Yeah.
like the Texado, Gaucho Ninjas, shoe, all kinds of other shoes that I see out there. So I think you're going to start seeing those shoe stores. My hope is they grow. They
Hmm.
become the shoe stores that are growing because they're coming out with the products that when you put them on, they feel really good. And they are starting to have to stretch into these different areas that they never thought they would, probably. But so for me, I think awareness would be we are going to do, I think that the two events we're going to do the one in UK with Barefoot Brit. We're also I think, going to do the one in Frankfurt. It's in June or July. And then we'll be at Anya's in Chicago in May. So I really enjoyed Anya's event in Denver last year. A lot of fun. And it's just fun to meet so many people that are very similar,
Hmm.
to me, to my thinking. And it was fun to see people excited about it. So I had never met anybody face to face about our shoes because most of our shoes are sold online, so phone calls. But so I think that would be, next year will be the shows and just seeing what stores want to carry it and see what happens.
Well, hey, Tom, I appreciate you for hopping on, sharing the story, of course, making this possible for all of us so that we can have our feet really be happy and look nice at the same time. So I'd love to have you share with the audience how people can learn more about what you're doing. So social and email, website, and of course, any ways that they can, interact and purchase your shoes. So go ahead.
So it's just the email is just Sullivent sullivent.com. And then the email is info@sullivent.com. So that's probably, but we're on Instagram, Facebook. And so they can always communicate that way also.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for hopping on. It's been a pleasure for myself
Yeah, thank you.
just to
Nice
be
to meet
here.
you.
And yes, sir. Like I said, I love doing this podcast and I love learning more about, the benefits of barefoot shoes and hearing from the founders and creators because it makes it really more meaningful to me that I have these relationships. And so I appreciate you for hopping onto the podcast.
You bet. You bet. Well, have a good one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.